Teacher walks into the classroom and hands out a sheet of paper to everyone in the class. And the layout of this particular classroom is that all the white kids are sitting in the front of the class and the black kids are sitting at the back. She then tells them to scrunch all their piece of paper into a ball and try and throw it into the trash can that is in the front of the class. Each of the students have a go throwing their paper in. All of the white students, except for one, manage to get their paper in the trash. And most of the black students miss, but one or two of them manage to get it in. And so you can look at that experiment and say, well, white people obviously throw better than black people, right? But actually, it's because of their unearned privilege of sitting at the front of the class, being nearer to the trash can, and having less of a distance to affect the paper in the air and all those kind of things, that leads to them having greater success. So I think we need to look a little bit deeper at this white privilege thing and see if we can unpack it a little bit further. My name is Brett Fish, and we're going to look a little bit deeper at white privilege. And I want to share two examples. A lot of people often push against white privilege, saying, yes, but my family had it tough. We were poor growing up. We didn't just have everything given to us. And I would say that is probably more the exception than the norm, but it is possible. And so the first story isn't going to speak directly to that, but the second story is going to kind of cancel all that out in terms of how we typically tend to view white privilege. So the first story, imagine this. You've got your typical average white student and black student in Cape Town. The white student probably grows up having a bedroom to themselves, or possibly they might share it with a younger brother. But typically they'll have their own room. They will have peace and quiet when they want to study. They might have headphones, be able to listen to music, drown out any kind of noise that's going on in the rest of the house. They might have somebody who comes to their house to clean the house, to look after their younger brother and sisters so they don't get in the way. They have access to knowledge through being connected to the internet. If they're not connected to the internet, then they can get to the library. There's probably one in walking distance, or they have a relative or friend who can take them there. So access to information, peace and quiet, both parents probably around. There's a possibility that their mom isn't working and has more time to spend with them, but it might be that both parents work and there's somebody else who kind of looks after the house and takes care of the children, things like that. But typically, probability is that both parents are around. And so 3 meals a day, they can have snacks whenever they want, generally looked after. And yeah, they can get about doing their work. They work hard at high school and they graduate with matric exemption and they are able to go to university. Now, if you take an average black child who grew up in a township, then you might find that their mom has to get up at 3, 4, 5 in the morning to take 3 modes of transport to go and clean probably that white student's house, to maybe go look after their brothers and sisters. She has to leave her children, often maybe in the care of the student that we're talking about, the younger siblings. And there's probably a one-parent family. They're living in the townships. There's a lot of noise. They're really in close proximity to other houses. There's gunfire. There's police sirens. There is just it's not a conducive space to learning. There's possibly not the same kind of access to internet and to library and books and research and people that will have information either. And that student is going to be sharing a space, maybe with 3 people, maybe with 5 people, maybe with 20 people. In extreme cases, you might find that the toilet they go to might be a bucket in the room that they sleep in, or it might be that they have to go out, and if it's at night, go out to a toilet that is 500 meters away from their house, with all the danger, the possibilities of things that could go wrong there. And so at graduation moment, that student works hard, they get to the point of graduation, matric exemption, and they apply for university. When you look at these two students, a black student and a white student, and they've both made it into university, you might think, wow, they've both done really well. But once you understand their context and you understand the stories, you realize that even though they've got to the same starting point or the same end point in a sense, that the black student had to overcome so much more to get there. So it looks like they've got to the same place, and the black student is probably a lot more exhausted and tired because of all the energy and effort and fear and anxiety and everything attached to their living conditions, the work they had to do probably in raising their siblings, and things like that. And so for me, that's an example of white privilege. No, it doesn't cover everyone. There are exceptions to that, but I think generally, for the majority of people in this country, those are the distinctions. I definitely relate to the southern suburbs type white student that had my own room, that had access, that had both parents available, and didn't have things like fear and violence and things around me. And so that is part of my white privilege. And you might say that's class privilege, that's money privilege. But in South Africa at the moment, those things are still largely defined by race. And so that's one way of looking at it. And you look at the students entering university, you think, oh, they've reached the same place. But actually, the black student has done a lot more to get there. They've overcome a lot more. It's as if they were sitting at the back of the class trying to throw their piece of paper into the bin, but it had furthermore to travel. They had to aim a lot more carefully. They had to take wind conditions into control and all that kind of thing. And their paper landing in the trash can was so much more effective, or spoke so much more than the white person's, because if the white person missed, it was ridiculous because they're sitting right next to the trash can. So that's the one example, and we can look at it and say, yeah, but I'm not that. My parents didn't have a lot of money. We were poor growing up and stuff, so that doesn't apply to me. And if that's true, then the second example, which I find one of the most helpful examples for me, it really opened my eyes to seeing that white privilege is not just about stuff. It's not just about having more. It's not just about having access. And it's the example of the movies. And I usually tell the story about 20 years ago, but I think most of it is still true today. But just say 20 years ago, growing up, when I went to go watch a movie with my dad, the first movie I ever saw was The Right Stuff, which was about breaking the sound barrier. It was about people going into space. Probably could have been called The White Stuff because I think everyone in that movie was white. But the idea was, as a kid, I watched this guy being a pilot. I watched him being a space walker, or a person going to space, astronaut, I think they call it. And I could identify with them. As a white person watching movies, I could be Indiana Jones. I could be the adventurer. I could be the king. I could be the love interest. I could be the leader of an expedition. I could be the leader of the pirate ship. I could be the explorer. I could be the scientist. I could pretty much see somebody in a role and relate to them in pretty much every role, including Jesus. A Middle Eastern man was typically portrayed by a white person. So I could even relate to somebody who was Middle Eastern just because the movies told me, no, they're white. So I could even be the son of God. Now, if we take that to a black person's experience growing up watching movies, there were typically two things they could expect. They would either be the bad guy or they would be the help. And the help could come in a range of things. It could be like a servant or a butler, but it could go all the way down to slave, or they could be the bad guy. So the villain in the piece was the black dude. And maybe an extreme third example, we can have a slasher movie where the black guy was the token black guy in the group who would be third one killed. But by looking at movies and seeing what the stories told me as a young person growing up, you can be anything you want to be. You can be absolutely anything. King, emperor, explorer, love interest, scientist, all of those things. A black person watching a movie, they could identify as the bad guy or as the help, the person that cleaned up the mess. Think about what that would do to your psyche. And maybe as a white person, we can't because we've never experienced it. We've just been able to go to movies and just dream and imagine. I've seen this example in Kaimandi, where I used to stay, where there would be guys in the township and you ask them, what do you want to become? And it would be petrol attendant and person working behind the girl at Spur and things like that. And so seeing a program where the first guy in that township got to study medicine and become a doctor suddenly opened up a whole range of even dreaming possibilities for young guys in this township. I can become a doctor. There are some kids that just a whole range of options in life is not open to them because of their background, because of their skin color. And that is starting to change and it's starting to get better. But to understand white privilege, this example of the movies, that my whole life I was fed the story that you can be everything. So by being white, I identify with everyone. By being black, by being colored, by being Asian, there were a lot less roles that would be fitting for me, and so a lot less dreams, a lot less representation, or the idea of connection with that person, with that thing. So I hope that gives you an idea into understanding of white privilege, that on many occasions and levels, it is having more stuff, it's having more opportunities, it's having more access, and it's that my road to get to the same place was a lot easier. It was a lot less strewn with obstacles and difficulty. Then the second part relates to identifying with people that we see on the screens. Another example of that would be dolls. So growing up, white kids could play with white dolls, and you could have a Barbie if you were a girl, or maybe a Ken or a G.I. Joe if you were a guy. But a black kid would have to play with a white doll as well. So even when you are getting creative and using your imagination, the very thing that you're using represents a white person. And so there's that disconnect between who you are and the story that you're putting together. And these things are all around us. And these particular aspects of white privilege do not relate to money, to whether you had a poor background, to the opportunities, to working hard, to anything like that. What it's saying is that as a white person, there are unearned privileges on the movie screen, dolls growing up, and some of those things are changing, which is great. But as a person growing up, there were unearned privileges that I got purely because I was white, and there were privileges that were held back from other people purely because they were black. And so it's so important for us to get this, that we're not just talking about the haves and the have-nots, that we're saying that white privilege is a thing. And so the next step is, once you've acknowledged that white privilege is a thing, what do we do with it? Do we have to sit and feel guilty? Do we have to leverage it for good? And we will look at that in a future video. But hopefully this one has just helped you get an understanding that white privilege may not be the thing that you thought it was, that it might be a lot bigger, that there's certain things that are all around us, even in the words we use, and we can look at that later as well. Some of the phrases that use the word white that are for good things, and black that are for bad things. It is all around us. This is a message that has elevated whiteness as being something that is good, something that is meant to aspire to. Beauty is we're meant to aspire to beauty as seen in white people. All of those kind of things that say that whiteness is good and anything that is not white is bad. All of that is wrapped up in this idea of white privileges and the unearned advantages I got simply for being white.